So first, I'll try to tell this story. I've been casting about how to describe what I think is the sort of fundamental problem, the misunderstanding of federal power. And I've come up with, as many of you know, I usually do this using my family and some story about my children. The kids are here. My wife, Carol, who I was about to introduce and say thank you to her, is now out with one of our kids. She's at the doorway back there. But my wife, Carol's here, and I'm grateful. We have 3 great children with us and 1 children in Carol's belly that'll be here on February 7th, if not sooner. So we're very blessed. So here's what I think about the story. You know, our kids went trick-or-treating. I know many of you have children or grandchildren. They go trick-or-treating. And when they got back, and this is a story, by the way, it didn't quite go down like this. They mostly came back and were so hopped up on sugar they really didn't go to sleep. But let's say they got home that night with all this candy from trick-or-treating. And Carol and I said, as the parents, we said to our 3 kids, the 3 of you are equal, and you can decide what to do with the candy. We're giving you that opportunity. And the 3 of them went about, deciding what they're going to do with the candy. And over time, they came back, and the 3 of them said, first Madeline, the oldest, said, we're going to take more candy, Mom and Dad. There's more left. We want more. And Carol and I looked at each other and said, how'd that happen? And Edward said, what we decided was we're going to take all of the candy you have, or various parts of it. And then Mikey, who's probably not capable of doing this, would have said, yes, I agree with both. I've decided that is totally within the rules and all. Well, that's a little bit of a silly example of what we have going on right now in America. Our constitutional system, and I see Dave Rowland here, he can tell you better than I can, our system was set up where the 3 branches of government, federal government, have been given some power by us, by we the people. Very different than what happened when you have divine right of kings in Europe and throughout history. We gave them some of our rights. We gave it through the states. We gave it to 3 branches. I think this is very important for people right now. They don't understand this fact. The legislative branch has said, we want more and more power. The executive branch has said, we want more and more power. And then the judiciary has said, like Mikey, we think that is by the rules. But see, they're not the ultimate judge of what is the rules. We are the people that have the power. And the Constitution is what frames out how we're supposed to live together. And I think it's a fundamental question for someone like Dave Rowland, who is litigating cases about freedom in the state courts. We all live in fear of a federal judge. A federal judge will say this or that, and therefore the situation is over. We're waiting for the Supreme Court to say what they think Obamacare means, whether it's a violation of our rights. And we all know it is. And the question we have to answer for ourselves is, are the federal courts the last judge, are they the last people to speak on power and sovereignty in our country? And the answer is no. We the people are. We the people are. It's a fundamental problem. Right now, I'll go into the second part of this. I'll just talk a little bit about a couple pieces of history in America which got us to this point today that is the problem. One is the Commerce Clause. I don't know if many of you are well versed in the Commerce Clause. Dave is, and others are. And the Commerce Clause has been used to expand the power of the federal government beyond anything we could ever recognize. I won't go into the details now, but suffice to say, the federal judiciary has agreed with Congress and agreed with the executive to say we want more and more power. Well, that's just wrong. That's just wrong. If you go down through history, you look at the other parts of American history, you're now seeing in the Supreme Court, we're seeing pushback, and we're seeing pushback in the legislature. I want to mention Cole McNary. Cole, are you here still? Cole McNary is in the back. Cole McNary is actually running for state treasurer. He's a state rep from out here. And Gretchen and Lisa and some others in happy memory of, there's Cole McNary in the back. Wave your hand, Cole. Gretchen and Lisa, we were talking, Cole and I was a school teacher before he became a dishonest man, a politician. And he and I were talking about education. Education's another place where the federal government and the federal judges tell us what we're allowed to do. It's not in the Constitution. It's not in the Constitution. So over time, we've seen an encroachment of our sovereign will, of our sovereignty, that should disturb all of us. Yeah. So the final point I'd like, and we'll go into this tonight, it's about Obamacare. Obamacare is the best opportunity we have to stop the worst legislation that I've ever seen. Obamacare is a unique opportunity. What I'd say, we'll have questions and answers. What I'd say is you need a couple of different things to make this happen. For us to nullify or to stop Obamacare. One, you need the will of the people to rise up like we did in Missouri, 71%, but we need it again and again and again. We need us to say it's not okay. Jim Lemke will tell us about how Jay Nixon is saying it's okay. Then we need legislators in our state legislature who will say it's not okay. And we're starting to have them. Then we need a governor who will say it's not okay. We need all these pieces. But we also need federal elected officials, whether senators, who are supposed to be responsive to the legislature, as you know, or representatives, who will stand in the way, interpose on the invasion of our sovereignty on behalf of the people. So we're going to have a chance to talk more tonight, but I want to say thank you again to the organizers. It's a great crowd. This is a hugely important issue, and we need to fight this fight every day to make sure we stop Obamacare, but also so that we get back what's our sovereignty, what's ours. It's not theirs, it's ours. So thanks again.
Well, I want to thank all of y'all for coming out. I want to thank you for having Bev and I here. You know, it really does warm your heart to come out on a cold night like this and see this many citizens interested in their government and willing to put themselves out to make a difference. I want to get right to substance, and I want to mention 3 things to you in the 5 minutes I have. I want to take a moment to frame the problem for you. I want to talk about what I think a winning solution is in the short term. And then I want to talk to you about a long-term victory, because I'm not the kind of person who likes to be on the defense. I'm not the kind of person who likes to just react. Now, in terms of the problem, you know, if I had a slogan for this campaign, and I could use my favorite one, and the hippies hadn't ruined it in the 60s, my slogan would be power to the people. Because that's all that animates my campaign. How do we return more power to the people that's been taken by the state government and the federal government? Well, to do that, you have to have a plan, but you also have to understand the problem. All of us are upset about Obamacare, and it's a terrible intrusion. But the biggest danger to Obamacare isn't the statute, it's the regulations that are going to come out of the statute. You know, Ed was right about the 3 branches of government, but I think there's another element here as to what's gone wrong with the balance of power, and that's the regulatory system. Let me give you a statistic to amaze and impress your friends with. Every day that the Obama administration's been in office, they have passed 10 new regulations. 365 days a year. You're less free in 10 ways today than you were yesterday, and you will be less free in 10 ways tomorrow. Now, to put that in perspective, Congress probably will not pass 10 bills this month. But there were 10 new rules today, and there'll be 10 more tomorrow. And coming out of Obamacare, out of the thousands of pages, is one directive after another for more rules. If the Obamacare bill is this big, the rules that will come out of it will be this big. One of the things that happened with the balance of power is the 3 branches gave up a bunch of power, starting in the 30s primarily, and they let it bleed down to regulatory officials who are responsible to no one. You want to be powerful in Washington, Ed? Don't run for Congress. Don't run for Senate. Be a regulator. That's where the real power is, because let me tell you something. Let's say the head of the EPA passes a rule that Ed hates. Well, Ed may can call him in for a hearing. They may give him a hard time, and they'll sit there impatiently looking at it because they're going to be thinking, you know what, Congressman? I passed my rule, and to overturn my rule, you've got to have a majority of the House vote to overturn it. You've got to have a majority of the Senate vote to overturn it in the same language. And you have to have a president sign it. Or you have to have enough votes to override it. So where's the real power in Washington? It's in the hands of people we don't vote for and that we can't take out of office. I'm going to return to that idea in a minute about the solution phase, because we have to address that. That's the biggest intrusion. The court cases are frustrating, the executive orders are frustrating, and the statutes are frustrating. But the regulations are a roaring river compared to a stream in comparison. So what do we do? Well, those of you who are on my email list have received an article from me a while back called State Sovereignty, a Winning Strategy. Those of you who aren't, if you sign up, we'll be happy to send it to you. We can talk about it more in the question period. But I think it's not enough to say we want to nullify, we want to oppose federal power. You have to have an actual plan to make it work. And in my article, I differentiate between funded and unfunded mandates, because we have to approach them differently. But just to give you a teaser, let me say this. Conservatives have not yet come up with a very good nullification strategy. But you know who has? Liberals. There are 2 forms of nullification working today that are working brilliantly. Medical marijuana in California That's nullification. And the sanctuary movement for illegal immigrants. I oppose both ends, but we as conservatives need to read that playbook. That has worked. And we can implement the same tactics here in Missouri. I'll be happy to talk more about the question and answer. And now I want to take one look longer term, because I don't like being on the defense. And the word nullification means you're on the defense. You're nullifying something someone else did. How do we get out of the pattern of needing to nullify and return to actual constitutional limited government? One part, as you may gather, is you have to get a hold of the regulations. And one thing I will do in Missouri when I'm elected governor is, between my election and the inauguration, we will go through the entire regulatory law of the state of Missouri. Every regulation that's too hostile to business, out of date, too intrusive, we will strike. And we will hand it to the legislature and we will say, pass this as the regulatory law of the state of Missouri. And then do something no state's done since the New Deal. Take away the power of the regulators to make any new rules. In one step, we'll return to constitutional government. In one step, the checks and balances will begin to work again in Missouri, because anyone that can pass a rule that will bind you will be someone you can vote for and hold accountable. Be happy to talk about more of this as we go. But my friends, we can fix these problems, but we can't do it piecemeal. We have to do it boldly. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. Appreciate it. I'm really excited to see a full room here tonight. I mean, the idea that on a cold Tuesday evening that we've got patriots that are here that are concerned about their state and their nation and their liberty, means a lot. It means a lot to, us that have been in the trenches, for the last number of years. I want to mention another thing before I get onto the topic. Do we know how blessed we are that we have men like these two on the ballot, wanting to serve us in this guy I've known for a long time. This guy I haven't known that long, but every time it seems like I'm at an event with him, I have to speak after him, and that's not a good thing. It is amazing the grasp that Bill has on these issues. I can't tell you. Now, I've been and I've served with a lot of politicians, okay, in the last 10 years, okay? And whether it be the guy that occupies the governor's mansion right now or any other candidates that I've seen for the office, none of them can hold a candle to this guy. Now, his problem is... You didn't know you had a problem, did you? His problem is that, in this business, your campaign has got to catch fire. It's got to catch fire because Bill is not going to have the ability to raise the kind of money that he needs to raise to get his name out and to really make this thing work, unless it catches fire. I mean, that can happen, okay? But you all have to be a part of it. If you believe in Bill Randall's, then you've got to get off your backside and come out on a Tuesday night to an event like this. But no, you really have to get cracking, because we need guys like Bill Randall's in state government. So I appreciate him being here. I don't have anything positive to say about the guy either. Oh, does it? Oh, Brian. Well, it's not going to take me very long because I usually do best, question Q&A. I want you to consider two things as we consider this doctrine of nullification. I want you to consider how the Declaration of Independence and our Constitution cannot be separated. Okay? They cannot be separated. Our Declaration is about natural law and where our rights come from. Okay? All right? And it's also about self-government. All right? And then as that connects to our Constitution, it's about our representation, okay, what their responsibility is on our behalf, right? As Ed said, we delegate power. We don't delegate rights to these entities, this dual sovereignty, this compound republic. I want you to remember those terms, okay? We, the people, delegate power to these entities to protect our rights. Okay? So we've got within that both of those republics, those compound republics, the separation of powers, right? And that's all connected. And then we've got the concept of limited government. All right? This doctrine of nullification was so important at the beginning of our nation, because this was not an easy process for our founders to work through. Remember, you know, they fought the Declaration of Independence. They fought a war for independence, right? Then they came together under the Articles of Confederation, all right? And they didn't work, all right? We were governed under those for 9 years, and they didn't work. We were splintering. We were falling apart, okay? So they came back together, and the process of ratifying our Constitution was a very, very difficult process, and it almost didn't happen. All right? By God's good providence, it did happen. Okay? But early on, we had all kinds of founders that had real questions about the amount of power that we were giving to this central government through this Constitution. They were very worried about it. And just shortly after, maybe 10 years after the Constitution was ratified, the first time that the doctrine of nullification was exercised was after Congress passed the Alien and Sedition Act. All right? You know what the Alien and Sedition Act did? 10 years after the ratification of the Constitution, it said that an American couldn't speak out against its government. How is that possible, folks? And in hindsight, those founders that had a concern about what Congress might do, that was warranted, wasn't it? Because this Congress that we had delegated power to and were afraid of, and believe me, our founders were afraid of government. In a very short period of time, they forgot, right? Or maybe they purposefully did it, because you know, once you get into these offices, you know, you're awful jealous of them, and you don't want to give them up. Am I getting close? Now,
5 minutes ago.
here's the deal. So Jefferson and Madison write the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions on behalf of their states, saying to the federal Congress, you can't do that. Now, what we're going to discuss here tonight is there is a lot of controversy over this doctrine of nullification. I mean, you know, Madison, at a time in his political career, believed it was a power that the states had, and then other writings that you see from him, he says, well, maybe they didn't. Okay, but I want you to think, and this is the other thing I want you to consider tonight, how important post-17th Amendment, post the 17th Amendment to our Constitution, which was ratified in 1913, how important this doctrine, this tool of nullification is now. Because our system is all built on checks and balances and separations of power. All right? And the biggest check that our founders built into the Constitution on behalf of state sovereignty and the sovereignty of the people was the idea that state legislatures put their U.S. senators in place. Not to represent you, the people, to represent the states. All right? And they were, and that was, the chain that the people had through the states on the federal government, and we gave that away in 1913. And from there on, the Republic was in jeopardy, and we've been going downhill since then. All right? So those are the things we have to talk about. And in the light of post-17th Amendment, this doctrine of nullification is key for us, the states, to stand in the gap on behalf of you, the people.
Amen.
All right? Thank you.
I'm just gonna. You hear me? Okay. I'm just gonna start out reading some quotes. This one's from Thomas Jefferson. On every question of construction of the Constitution, carry ourselves back in time when the Constitution was adopted, recollect the spirit manifested in the debates, and instead of trying what meaning may be squeezed out of the text or invented against it, conform to the probable one in which it was passed. From the author of the Declaration of Independence. In other words, what he's saying is, it just might not be a living, breathing Constitution. Maybe, just maybe, what you should do is you ought to go back and read the minutes that James Madison kept at the Constitutional Convention. He later on said, "Our peculiar security is in possession of a written Constitution. Let us not make it a blank paper by construction." In other words, what he's saying there is, let's not so broadly interpret the Constitution that it might as well just be a blank piece of paper and not have any value to anybody. When he was drafting the Kentucky resolutions, Thomas Jefferson said, "Whensoever the general government assumes undelegated powers, its acts are unauthoritative, void, and of no force." He said the same thing again when he was helping draft some other states' resolutions also. He said, "I believe the states can best govern our home concerns, and the general government our foreign ones." He said, "When all power is drawn to Washington, it will defeat the purposes for which we separated from England in the first place." Amen. James Madison, who a lot of people call the father of the Constitution, he's the one that kept the minutes during the constitutional debate. He said, "There are more instances of the abridgment of the freedom of the people by gradual and silent encroachments of those in power than by violent and sudden usurpations." And so that's kind of what I want to talk about for just the next couple minutes. I thought I set my timer here. Okay, I'll start it now. 5 minutes. Just kidding. But I just want to make a point that I heard Ed Martin say. We were at this event out in Kansas City, Nullify Now, and the whole idea behind the talk that he gave was that it's not enough to vote, you have to win the argument. And so just I want to use what I learned from him that day and say, with all the policies, one of the things that I learned in Jefferson City is that, let me go back to a Jefferson quote real quick. He said, y'all heard the quote about the chains of the Constitution? "Have no confidence in man, but bind him down from his mischief with the chains of the Constitution." Contrast that with what FDR said. He said there is no document that's more marvelously elastic than the Constitution. But see, people today think that is an elastic document. You have the Democrats on the left, and their interpretation stretches it way over to the left, and then instead of sticking to the Constitution as a chain, or even to the party platform, unfortunately in most cases, the Republicans will grab it, and they'll counter those leftist policies by grabbing the Constitution and stretching it way over to the right. And what it does every single time is it grows freedom, it robs you of your property, your tax dollars, and your liberty. And so what we're doing is we're taking a right policy and using that to combat a leftist policy, and nobody's even giving any credit to the Constitution anymore. I was in a committee during the special session, and a Republican actually said this. Somebody came forward to testify against the bill, and somebody said, "I'm not so sure it's the role of the legislature to consider the constitutionality of this bill." I read the Constitution on the House floor in a debate. And I heard a whole bunch of commotion in the back, and somebody actually raised a point of order and tried to convince the speaker that I was out of order for reading from the Constitution. Now, you kind of want to smile and say, "Those idiots." No, those are the people that are getting elected, setting policy, that are taxing you and growing government and taking away your freedom and your liberty. So it's not enough just to go and vote. You have to make sure that you're educating everybody else that's also voting about the principles of freedom and liberty. And people will respond to it because that is an extremely attractive message. Because people throughout the history of the world have died fighting for their freedom and fighting for their liberty. And you can't tell me, a guy who won in a district that is only 56% Democrat, you can't tell me that people don't respond to the message of liberty, because I went up to a guy and gave him my message when I was campaigning, and he told me that he's upset with President Obama because he's not far enough to the left. But he's going to vote for me because he likes what I had to say. I attribute that to the fact that this thing that we call the overwhelming sense of truth that God gives us all when He created us all equal and endowed us all with certain inalienable rights, it's an attractive message, and people want their freedom and they want their liberty protected. And if we can get that argument and win that argument with the people, nullification is not going to be a problem at all. Because it's going to come like that, because people are going to be able to read the Constitution and recognize what they need to do in order to keep themselves free. It's a simple thing to do, I think. It's an attractive message. Thank you.
For Ed, the healthcare compact bill that amazingly was passed in the Missouri House and Senate, and the governor let lay long enough for it to become law, is now Missouri state law. And I look at Obamacare as a 12-headed hydra that we need to attack from every possible point. And while the healthcare compact would probably not be at the top of my list, there's a number of other states that have also, that's become state law. The next step in that process is the states getting together and creating that compact, where they're saying, this is what we choose to do for our health care. The next step is it has to be passed through the United States House, which I think should be an easy sell, and then be passed through the Senate. It does not have to be signed by the president. If those hurdles are passed, that supersedes federal law. And my question is, are you familiar with what the states are doing, Missouri being one of them, that have passed the healthcare compact to bring that to fruition? My thinking is also, if that process goes through and it then goes to the Senate, that's going to be at an election time, and people like Claire McCaskill will have to choose between voting in favor of their state controlling its own health care or voting against her own state controlling their own health care. And I think that would put a tremendous amount of pressure on the quote-unquote blue dog Democrats in the Senate.
Well, I'm not an expert on the healthcare compact, but I will tell you that this is a fight, I think someone said earlier, this is a fight that we've got to take on at every level. But let me point out a couple things. I mean, Jim, I hope you're going to talk in a minute about the fact that Missouri, not only did we pass the healthcare compact law, not only did we have the proposition that 71% of the people voted for that said, please don't do this. By the way, I don't think Senator Jane Cunningham is here, but no gathering that talks about these issues will be complete without mentioning her name and thanking her for doing that. But not only have we done all that, we've also had vocal opposition publicly from the legislature on these issues. I think there's been some confusion on the health care, the exchange. I think Jim will talk about it. We've got all of that. And yet we have two problems in Missouri. One problem is that the Attorney General, who's supposed to litigate these cases, is Attorney General Chris Koster, is hiding under his desk or traveling around trying to find, the puppy mills or whatever he's doing. He's not taking on this issue. And I think what we have to have, and I know Bill's an attorney, I'm an attorney, Dave Rowland, I keep mentioning his name, we have to have fearless lawyers in office that will take this on. So the first thing I'd say is that our Attorney General, he finally filed a brief that actually said, I think Obamacare might be unconstitutional, but I really like the policy, and I'm not sure, and I'm going back under my desk as quick as I can, and just don't tell the Democrats or the Republicans. Mitch, I don't know, it's a summary, Mitch Hubbard may know better, but so as to the healthcare compact, here's what I would say. I think that healthcare compact, my read of other states, is it's unlikely to be successful in enough states. I think it's convoluted in some ways, people don't quite understand it, and I don't think that that's going to be the most successful way. I happen to think that a state, whether it's Missouri or another state, will actually nullify Obamacare. And I think that will set up a showdown. Everybody here should thank Scott Walker for showing the country that you can stand up. That you can stand up to the unions and to what's gone on. But I have to be candid with you. Scott Walker's, what he did was a question of state law. He said our state's laws are bad. What he doesn't know is that if Obama wins again and they get their way, the NLRB, the National Labor and Relations Board, will do to the whole country what they did in Wisconsin over 25 years. So that was a fight over state law. The next fight is going to be a governor with a guy like Lemke and Nieves and a gal like Cunningham and Kurtman and others who are going to say, hey, wait, as to the structure of our country, you're not allowed to do this. And that's going to set up a fight, a question of the sovereignty of we the people that I think is the future, because it's not just Obamacare. We got to win that argument. Then we got to move on to things like EPA and FERC, and everybody else knows that there's a bunch of them. So I'm not as high on the compact, I'll be candid with you.
Directed at Bill Randall's, and I really value having the thoughtful and deep discussion tonight. one thing I particularly enjoyed, you know, when I was in the Missouri House for 8 years, I did all I could legislatively to correct the problem. And in fact, I was the one who filed the original Healthcare Freedom Act in Missouri that did pass out of the House. And why I did it is because at the time, that was all we could do. But what I appreciated about your very intellectual comments is I've never actually heard it framed in such a manner that a state can stop the regulation. And that's a whole new idea that makes so much sense. And I am, you know, that I'm intending to be your lieutenant governor. And so while we're there together, Bill, tell me more about how a state can say we will not respect any federal law with the bureaucrats regulating it. Explain that a little deeper.
To understand about federal law is there are two ways that the federal government controls the states. One is unfunded mandates, where they just say, do what I say because I say so. The second are funded or partially funded mandates, where they give you a check with strings attached. Education, environmental laws, etc. Obamacare is essentially an unfunded mandate. I mean, they've said that we may get a little because of the exchanges and stuff, but there's no money appropriated, so it's an unfunded mandate. As a threshold matter, as governor of Missouri, I would take the position that all federal unfunded mandates are unconstitutional, and I would resist them. Anytime the federal government steps outside the traditional areas, it's engaging in unconstitutional activity. Furthermore, now, you can't take this, the second position I'm going to articulate, the courts rejected in the 30s, but that does not mean we can't revisit it. I believe that the regulatory scheme we have in Washington, and to some extent in Jeff City, is unconstitutional. It's a delegation of the power to make laws to people that aren't voted on by the people. That's not a Republican form of government. It's something else. And so I would take the position that all regulations that come out of DHHS with respect to Obamacare are unconstitutional intrusions, and we would test them, and we would delay. Now, all of these, of course, are based on the assumption that Obama wins re-election, and we're stuck with it. Obviously, if it's fixed by Republicans, we will have had a good discussion tonight, talked about a wide range of issues. But assuming the worst-case scenario, this is why I turned your attention to medical marijuana and sanctuary cities. Because, again, I don't agree with the goals, but those are very effective nullification techniques because they're delaying. They are, when really pressed, pretending to comply but not complying. They're going around the regulations with a different scheme. And so it is, in effect, an example of the states behaving like teenagers who the federal government walks by and says, clean your room, and they say, okay, and they don't. And they walk by and say, clean your room, and you don't. And so it's a more sophisticated legal strategy than that, but essentially that's what we would do, and we would wait Barack Obama out.
Can I do a quick follow-up? Would that eliminate the EPA as well, because they're doing more regulations than any other branch? Are you talking about all the federal management and all the, I mean, you want to start with creating a list of the bureaucratic decisions that are hurting our lives. Where do you cut it off with what the state is obligated to comply with?
Your question's a good one. The EPA is one of those partially funded mandates. The EPA has vast power, but almost no enforcement personnel. So what they do is they pay the states to enforce the federal laws. And they give us a pittance, a few $1 million, and in exchange, our DNR folks become EPA's cops. One of the first things I will ask the legislature to do as governor is say no to this federal money. We will say to the EPA, enforce your own rules. But that's how you have to draw the distinction between funded and unfunded. We can do the same thing in education. Keep your own money and we'll pass our own rules. But we've got to start that plan, and we've got to do it very conscientiously and very publicly.
That Bill mentioned the idea of, and we worked on this in the Senate this last session when the federal government was trying to send us, more of the stimulus money. Okay, myself and Senator Nieves and a couple of our colleagues stood up for weeks every time these bills came in front of us and filibustered them. All right, said send the money back. We don't want it. They don't have it. Okay, they're borrowing it from China. Okay, they're borrowing it from our children and grandchildren. Okay, they sent us an extension, the 4th extension of unemployment benefits. Now, I realize that we all know somebody that's unemployed, or we all have a family member that's unemployed. It's a very difficult thing to do, to stand on that Senate floor and say, send the money back. Okay? But, you know, sooner or later in this job, you've got to be able to say, it's the people's money, right? And 99 weeks, is too long to live off your neighbor's dollar. All right? So, as far as unfunded mandates, the problem is all the states, including Missouri, we're all hooked on the heroin, folks. All right? We don't have to do these programs, for the most part. That's why this issue is such an important issue, because this issue is an issue where they said, yes, states, you are going to do it. Okay? You don't have a choice. I mean, if we can opt out of the Medicaid program, okay, but they pay for 60% of it, and we pay for 40%. Now that 40% love, on an $8 billion program, uses up a lot of our revenue that you send down to Jeff City. Okay, so once you get hooked on the 60%, okay, it's pretty tough. Now, this expansion under Obamacare for Medicaid, you know what we found out in our hearings today? They estimate it's going to add to our Medicaid program. We currently have 900,000 Missourians on Medicaid. 900,000. This expansion under Obamacare will add an estimated 410,000 Missourians. All right? At a cost of over $3 billion. $3 billion. Now, the state, in Obamacare, the feds pick up about 90% of the cost, and the state's 10%. Now, 10% of $3 billion is $300 million. Two things. First of all, we have a $500 million shortfall that we're looking at this next year as a state. And we're going to have to make some tough decisions on the cuts that we're going to make, because we're not going to raise your taxes. All right? So we're going to be cutting spending. All right? The second thing that should concern us all is our government, our federal government's broke. Where are they going to get the 90% to pay for this? Does anybody out there believe that they're actually a year, 2 years, 3 years down the road, they're going to say, oh, we don't have the money. But you've expanded your programs. Here's a new entitlement, right, that everybody's used to, and then what does the court say? The court say, well, the public is already used to having this benefit. You can't see that's what got us into trouble with these other social programs that expanded government on a large scale. The point is, this is the right issue for us to be standing the ground, and drawing the line in the sand. This is really the issue. And I can tell you that myself and colleagues in the Senate and those that I saw in this hearing today looking at, should we establish a state exchange? It's a direct, it's a direct piece of Obamacare, okay? I can confidently stand here today and tell you Missouri will not be establishing a state exchange. And I can tell you, even though the House passed an exchange bill out, what was the vote, Representative? Unanimously. And we killed it in the Senate. All right? That's what the Senate, by the way, that's what the Senate's for. All right? Every time we pass a piece of legislation, you lose a little bit more of your liberty. All right? And what some people call dysfunction, all right, in Jefferson City, is government working exactly the way it should work. All right? Because my job is to protect your liberty, okay? And the gain of your own industry.
Is it on? Okay.
We can hear you.
Yeah, all right, great. I have a question. I don't know which one of you want to answer it, maybe all of you. I'm sorry Ed left because I would have liked to hear what he had to say, but You guys are talking about nullification, I'm all with you. But what about the court system? We've learned before that the court system can nullify what you guys do. If you pass a law that's constitutional, they can call it unconstitutional and vice versa. And we've got a judiciary that's made law where they're not supposed to be making law. They're that third branch that's supposed to interpret the Constitution, not make law, but they've done it. So what do you do about those guys?
Judicial branch can't enforce anything. They don't have the power to enforce it. Andrew Jackson one time sent troops, I think, down into Mexico, and they said, oh, it's unconstitutional. The court said you can't do that, and he said, well, let him enforce it. Because he's the chief executive. He's the chief executor of the law. So, yeah, they can say that what we're doing is unconstitutional, and we can play this whole game back and forth, but if we have a strong governor, a governor can basically say, well, we don't have to enforce the court's ruling. And I would say that as long as we're in keeping with the Constitution, we're following the parameters of the role of government within the confines of natural law, meaning that the proper role of government is to protect people's individual God-given liberties, then I would say that in a case like that the governor would be totally acting appropriately.
The judiciary has, neither the power of the sword or the purse, all right? And remember that we have, since the Civil War, allowed, and when I say we the people, and then the other two branches have run away from the courts with their tail between their legs, all right? And all we need to do is start standing up, and within the rule of law, all right, and thank them for their opinion. All right, because that's what they used to call them, right? They used to call them opinions. And you know what? How would it be possible? Think this through. I wish I could have been a fly on the wall, in Constitutional Hall as they were having these debates. But think about, again, that separation of powers and the idea that the states, the 13 states that were establishing this rule of law, this Constitution, to actually have this agent, the federal government, okay, that would be delegated certain powers on behalf of the states to protect the states and the people, right? Imagine a concept that if the state as a sovereign got into a debate with the federal government as the other of the two dual sovereigns, and that the final arbiter of that dispute between the two would be a branch of one of those sovereigns that is in the dispute. That would be like me getting into a fight with my neighbor, all right, and then going to his mother to adjudicate the problem between the two of us, right? There is no way that that's what our founding fathers were thinking. It can't be. What I do believe that they were thinking was that, again, the power resides in the people, and which branch is closest to the people? The legislative branch, right? The genius of having them come up for re-election every 2 years, so they were responsible to the people. If the court deems that something, they render an opinion that says something that you just did is outside the Constitution, and then a governor or a legislature stands up and thumbs their nose, okay, at the courts, it's up to you, the people, to make the right decision to throw those bums out of office so that they do things that are within the bounds of our Constitution. Glenn Beck wrote this book on the original argument, and no matter what you think of Glenn Beck, if you're a big fan or not a big fan, you've got to pick this up, because this is the Federalist Papers rewritten and with some commentary so that a guy like me can understand them. All right? And if you can believe that 3 of our founders, Hamilton, Madison, and Jay, wrote 85 different treatises, these papers, all right, to describe what they were thinking and what the debate was like when the when they were putting together the Constitution, and then they printed these in the local papers for you, the people, to read, to sell to the people, so that they could get their representation, their representatives to ratify, right? That's how they did it. They actually went to the people and said, this is what we're doing on your behalf. You know how important that is? So we can understand it. We don't need some guy in a black robe telling us what's constitutional and what's not. I don't want to fight this battle on Obamacare in the courts. I don't care what the courts say. I can tell you that it falls outside of Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. All right?
Yes. Oops, is it not on? Is it on? Okay. Before I say anything, ask the question, I just have a suggestion, making a comment about, I think it was Jim in your opening statement. You said it wasn't enough to vote, we must educate as well the public. Just a suggestion, this is Christmas time. One of the things I'm doing to get the word out about Bill Randall's is sending one of his flyers in all of my Christmas cards. Yeah. With a little note, this is who I'm supporting. People if they don't know him, will then know him and have the flyer. So that is one way to do it. Your entire Christmas list gets a flyer for the candidate you're supporting. And my question, I guess, would be to Senator Lemke and Paul Kurtman. The Healthcare Freedom Act that was passed last year, this year, that was passed, that was 71% of the vote. If, heaven forbid, Obama is reelected, how will that affect this state when Obamacare in full takes effect in January 2013?
I think its main effect is it was the people telling their legislators, okay, that they don't want this to be the policy of Missouri. You know, beyond that, you know, it's again going to have to be challenged in the courts if your legislature tries to move forward, all right? Then you have a state statute, all right, that somebody would bring a challenge against, and then we'd have to rely on the courts. You know, the message that we, the people, have to continue to send to our elected officials at the state level is, we don't want to have anything to do with Obamacare, all right? So, you know, don't establish the exchange, don't take any of the money. I mean, I see a patriot right back here, Gretchen. I mean, she right? Tells me all the time, quit taking that money, that federal money, for education. She's exactly right. Right? Because you know what we can say to the federal government then when they try to stick their nose in on how we educate our children? You know, we can tell them to get out of our business. Right? But if you take the heroin, you know, then they're going to want to, you know, chime in.
Just thinking outside the box a little bit. I think your question was if Obamacare comes to us in full because it gets reelected, we can still nullify it with a strong governor. Well, let's just say we still have this liberal guy in office. I think it might be fun to introduce a resolution urging our Attorney General, who's a Democrat right now, to sue our Democrat governor for violation of Proposition C, because Proposition C gives the people the freedom to participate or to not participate in Obamacare. So I'm just saying it might help draw a lot of attention right back to the whole issue, and then at the following election, we might get rid of a governor and a bad Attorney General.
Let there be sound. The question, I guess, for every one of you, to Representative Kurtman, when the exchange passed unanimously, I assume you were out of the room at the time. You might want to explain that one later. To Bill Randall's, that the medical marijuana, I agree with you. Do you take that as a nullification by California of a federal statute, or did they just legalize it according to state statute? Because my understanding is the federal government's still arresting people in California for medical marijuana. So they really didn't nullify the federal statute. I guess the hardest question I got, unfortunately for a very dear friend, and my biggest concern on this issue, and I guess I'm the fly in the ointment, nullification scares me. I do think that's what existed under the Articles of Confederation, and that's why we have a Constitution in the first place, because we didn't want a single state to be able to nullify federal law. That was the problem that caused the Constitution in the first place. I know Jefferson wrote Kentucky resolutions. He later corrected himself. I don't know if you're familiar with a letter in which he calls the people the true corrective. I think the problem that we have with our Constitution today, this could be directed to every single person in the room, and I'm guilty of it myself. Have you ever voted for an elected official who violated the Constitution of the United States? Because if you have, you're not part of Jefferson's solution. Madison talked about nullification, as you said, towards the end of his life. He described it as a fatal inlet to anarchy and a contradiction in terms. Madison's solution was different. He did not want a single state to nullify. He wanted a majority of states to nullify. He called for a constitutional amendment in a letter, 1835. John C. Calhoun ignored it. That's my question.
Well, I guess I'll start with the medical marijuana. Medical marijuana is nullification, and it's very well done. You're right, the federal government's arresting a few people in California, large-scale traffickers. What they're not doing is going in and arresting the guys running the medical marijuana shops. They know where to find them. I saw 2 of them on Bill O'Reilly a couple of weeks ago. Did y'all see them? $20 million gross a year. It's pretty easy to find them, and the IRS knows where they are. They call themselves nonprofit, but they wouldn't say how much money they personally made off that nonprofit. Look, if that's not nullification, I don't know what is. The federal law says you can't have or sell marijuana. They're having and selling marijuana in vast quantities under a pretext of legality, under a fig leaf. So I think it's classic. Now, I'm going to give Jim a little introduction to answer his question. Sure, not that he needs it, but the nullification discussion you've got to keep in mind when you refer to the founders. The founders were discussing a very narrow range of federal options. They never envisioned a notion of where the federal government would impose uniformity on the states in a host of ways. They embraced state differences, huge state differences. As a matter of fact, when our Constitution was established, many people don't know this, several states had established churches. And they did for a long time. The federal government didn't try to stamp that out. Now, I'm not saying it's a good idea, but I'm just using it as an illustration of examples of differences. The states were the laboratory of democracy, and they were free to function very differently. What has happened recently is the federal government has pressed the states into the same mold, so they become not much more than poorly paid provinces of the federal government. That's why you're seeing the resurgence in the idea of nullification. And I don't think we should get hung up on terms. We can call it nullification from the negative, or from the positive. We can say limited government. We can talk about state sovereignty. It's all the same notion. The federal government has a lane it's supposed to be in, and the states have their own lane, and then the people have the biggest lane. We flip that around. And so that's why what the founders were saying about it is instructive, but in a sense not determinative, because they never envisioned a world where the federal government would occupy so much of our activities. Jim?
I can't improve on that. Leo said that? I can't improve on that. The only thing I would add is that this is a debate and a discussion that is worthy of us having. All right? Now, we might not agree. Even, I don't think our founders agreed, okay, on the issue. And so, but what we do need to do is call into question those lanes. And that's what we're doing. When we're advocating that a state stand in the gap on behalf of the people, all right, against tyrannical government. And that's what we have. We have tyrants that refuse. They can read, okay? So they are refusing. I mean, I'm not talking about a 2,000-page bill. I'm talking about a constitution. That's what? How many is it? 3,500 words long, right? And they can understand it, but they choose not to. As a matter of fact, they laugh in the face of the people that have elected it to ask them if they think a bill is constitutional. And it's time for a revolution. Yeah. You're right. All right. it might, you know, it might have to be every 20 years or so that we might need a bloody revolution, okay? I'm not advocating a bloody revolution. We need a revolution at the polls, all right? And we need to throw every one of the bums out, and I don't care what letter is behind their name, all right? I don't care if they're Republican or Democrat. Question, have we ever voted for a politician, an elected official that has supported an unconstitutional bill? I've done it just recently, and I'm not proud of it. But if he's not careful, he's going to have some competition in 4 years. All right? I hope you all know who I'm talking about. All right.
Just real quick about that healthcare exchange, that it did vote unanimous. Here's the deal. According to Obamacare, every state's supposed to set up an exchange by 2013. Now, either A, the legislature can take charge of the exchange and do it themselves, or B, the governor can go ahead and invite the federal government in to set up a bureaucracy all on their own, outside of any control of the state legislature. So I, like a lot of my colleagues, said, you know what, this is a position that we don't want to be in. We're just the legislature. We can't enforce the law. All we can do is say, if we have the opportunity to take it, then give it to us, because it's kind of like this. I don't know if anybody here's ever thrown a grenade. I've thrown lots of them. Was in the Marines for several years. If I'm locked in a box with the enemy, in this case a liberal governor, and somebody comes over and throws a grenade in, I'm going to do my best to get my hands on that grenade. Because if he gets his hands on it, I don't trust him with it. Now, it's a grenade. I would rather not have it at all. But if that's the box that I'm put in, then I would much rather be under the control. And in that bill also, at the very end, we did something that at least the governor sure wouldn't have done, is we put in there that as soon as Obamacare is ruled unconstitutional, the whole exchange goes away. But if the federal government would have come in and set up the whole exchange on their own, Obamacare might have been ruled unconstitutional, but now we got a federal bureaucracy operating in Missouri that we can't get rid of. So that kind of puts the question in a whole different perspective.
Paul,
So that's why.
I could maybe disagree with you just a little bit.
Well, you can't. I'm just saying from the perspective that we had at the time. That's why. But now it died when it got to the Senate. That's fine. That's great. I'm just saying that there's some people that might have voted for it. That doesn't really make them any less conservative. They had reasons for voting for it, and that might have been one of the reasons because it was sure one of mine. And the governor, for example, he wants this grenade to go off because when the Senate was going around the state having hearings on the healthcare exchange, he went ahead and got an executive order all ready to go anyway. So he was wanting to do it. He does not want the legislature to have it. If that gives you any indication of what his liberal agenda might be. So that was just one reason to explain why anybody might want to know why it was I voted for it, and the rest of my colleagues did too. It doesn't make them any less conservative. We just see a grenade, and we don't want the governor to have that particular grenade, and he wants it.
Paul, I would have to disagree with you a little bit about the grenade analogy. I think that the grenade, once we pass 609, belongs to us. A couple of points. If you read 609, you'll see that had we set up a Missouri exchange, that we would be responsible for the cost of running that bureaucracy after 2014. We would own it. And when that grenade explodes, we're the ones holding the grenade, not the federal government.
We're already holding it.
That's
It's
right.
taxpayer money. We're already holding that grenade.
The other point, I don't know if you're aware of this, but the Cato Institute and the Wall Street Journal both, there's a glitch in the healthcare law where if the states set up exchanges, they have a mechanism for premium support. But if the federal government sets up the healthcare exchange, there is no mechanism for premium support, which is a huge, huge thing. The whole concept of Obamacare is predicated on you paying for your neighbor's health care. You take that away, and it's a huge, huge thing. So I think not passing 609 in Missouri, not setting up healthcare exchanges is a form of nullification. We're saying we are not going to participate in our own demise. We're not going to participate in what you're trying to shove down our throat. Once we've passed that, they've achieved triangulation. We've now bought into their plan. we've become part of their plan. And also, if you read 609, it requires the state of Missouri and the bureaucracy that we've set up in their behalf to report on people who have not complied with Obamacare, who have not bought approved health insurance, report to employers on employees. So, respectfully, I think the Missouri House was not doing their job. Sorry.
What is 609?
How much power does a governor have? Because I would think a governor would be able to say, EPA, get the heck out of my state. Obama, I don't care what you say, I'm just not going to do it because this is not right for our state. Can somebody address that?
Well, since I'm running for the job, I'll take first crack. The Constitution of the state of Missouri gives Missouri one of the most powerful governorships in the country. The governor has vast powers in the state, rarely used, but vast powers. The truth is, although I would ask the legislature to do the things that I've talked to you about because I believe in doing things in the open, I think I could probably, by executive order, refuse the EPA's money, refuse the Department of Education money, but I believe there will be overwhelming support in the legislature. I'm going to submit it to them. In terms of these other proposals, the good thing about being a governor is you have official immunity for most acts you take. And so this resistance to the federal government is something I can do as part of my job. I hope we elect a Republican Attorney General because a Democrat's going to be very depressed as he's defending me repeatedly in court against intrusions against the federal government. And you have the ability to shape the argument. One of the advantages to being a lawyer is you know where the play is in the law. So when the federal government says do X, I will say no. And then if I get a judicial opinion that says I have to do X, then I'll do X plus Y minus Z and say I've complied, like medical marijuana and sanctuary cities, and let them litigate it again until we wait them out. You can do a lot of these kinds of things. And you can essentially tie the federal government's hands, as Senator Lemke said, by getting off the federal money. And we have a lot of support for that in the legislature now, leaders that are backing it. And I think the public's ready for it. I think the public is ready, perhaps, to forego a few state services in exchange for a lot more freedom. So we can do that, and we can shape this discussion in a myriad of ways going forward. And I will.
I spent 16 years in the legislature, all in the minority party. I think you all need to know that part of the reason why you got such good men up there is because you're working hard. People like you are the reason why we've taken over the House and the Senate, why we're doing some things. Stay with us. Keep fighting for us. Thank you.
Yes, sir. I believe when the Constitution was crafted, it was written in layman's terms so that the average person, the farmer, the merchant, could understand unequivocally what the Constitution meant. I guess this question would be addressed to Bill Randall, since he's the attorney on the panel. Why is it that if the Constitution is written in layman's terms, do we need attorneys to interpret it?
Well, you know, you have to get a certain undesirable element off the street without committing crimes. Your point is a very good one. Something that bothers me greatly is this notion of the Constitution as a living document that changes over time. The Constitution is nothing more and nothing less than a contract that the people and the government entered into. Now imagine if you and I had a business contract, and I got to reinterpret it anytime I wanted to your detriment and to my benefit. Well, that's exactly what's been going on since. And anytime people give you complicated legal doctrines to try to explain the Constitution, they're hiding something. It's a simple document of freedom, a simple document of rights and powers that any reasonably educated citizen should be able to thoroughly understand. But they have an agenda. That's why.
My comment is really around the refusal of federal funds. And when I look at the Missouri budget, about 1/3 of that in round numbers comes from the federal government. So my question is, why would an intelligent people pay a federal bureaucracy to take our money away from us, than have a separate federal bureaucracy to decide how much of it to give back and when to give it back? Why don't we just keep it here?
Hey, I like that.
I have a feeling my good friend Jim Leckie doesn't want to talk about that for 30 seconds.
Amen. I mean, I don't know what else I can say. I mean, that is the question. And again, if there's any reason to send Ed Martin, you know, to Congress, it's for guys like Ed Martin to start asking those questions, right? And you know, if we're turning this ship around, and the only way we're going to do that is to get majorities in Washington, D.C. that understand the Constitution and the concept of limited government, and then start reining the thing in. And the process has to start, folks. I mean, we didn't get here overnight. A smart theologian once told me that there are never leaps into apostasy. It's always slow drift. Well, we've been at a drift for a long time, all right? And this is not going to be fixed overnight. But we have to start. We have to start the process of fixing and righting this ship, you know, for our children and grandchildren. So that's how you do it. You know, if they don't believe in the Constitution, all right, if they're not talking about the Constitution, get as far away from that candidate as possible. All right?
Another question in the back.
Yes, Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. Can you hear me?
No.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, the powers of Congress. To coin money, regulate the value thereof. This is addressed more to Representative Kurtman. Regulate the value thereof. And you know what came out of that? Regulate the value thereof. The Federal Reserve System. You can boo now. Anybody want to boo? All right. So I wanted to ask Representative Kurtman, his sound money bill, does that have the effect of nullifying the Federal Reserve System by taking the power of a person to regulate the value of their money? You see what I'm saying?
Yes. And the answer is yes and no. And the reason it has to be yes and no is because the sound money bill that I'll be introducing, just real quick, for my people in here, if I don't even know what it is, because I haven't really spent a whole lot of time talking about it. I flew out to Utah earlier this year, and Utah passed a bill called the Sound Money Bill, and basically what this bill does is if anybody has United States minted gold and silver coins, they're allowed to put those coins into a depository, and in exchange for putting their money in that depository, those gold and silver coins, they'll be issued a debit card. So then they can go around, and they can actually use their debit card to purchase things based on the value of gold and silver, because they have gold and silver in that account, not just Federal Reserve notes. So this is going to allow people to have an increased purchasing power in their, with their money. It's going to allow there to be competitive currencies, so to speak. So if the value of gold and silver skyrockets and really goes up, well, you just need a lot more money. You can use your debit card and spend your gold and silver. And if it plummets, then you go back to using worthless Federal Reserve notes. The value of the dollar continues to plummet. So that bill will nullify the monopoly that the Federal Reserve has in Missouri. And one of the side effects of this, there's people that invest in gold and silver. And if they ever want to get their value of the gold and silver, they actually have to take all that gold and silver and sell it and get and exchange it for Federal Reserve notes. But this will allow them to keep it a depository. So there's going to be people from all over the country, all over the world maybe, who take their gold and silver and they say, well, I'm going to go to Missouri and keep my money in a depository in Missouri, and whenever I spend that money, I'm going to be spending it in Missouri. So there's going to be a whole lot more commerce here, hopefully. That's the idea. Since Utah passed this bill, there's been over $1 billion worth of money in gold and silver currency that they already know people are planning on moving to their state because they know they can actually spend it at face value in their state. So it's a fantastic idea. So we're going to be introducing that bill hopefully this year, and I have another bill that's going right along with that. to help draw attention to it, and I need everybody to sign my petition. It's at paulturpin.net. But I'm introducing the House resolution and if it passes, Missouri will be taking a position on the Federal Reserve transparency bills that are in Washington, D.C. They did a partial audit of the Federal Reserve, and they found out that upwards of $16 trillion in secret was created and then loaned out to bail out foreign central banks. The Federal Reserve does not have that authority. Article 1, Section